Commander David Hayes sat in the observation deck of the flagship, watching the distant stars burn with an orange haze. Somewhere out there, whole civilizations were dying. The collective had come to this sector like a plague, consuming everything in its path. 17 worlds had fallen in 6 months. 17. The words repeated in his mind like a curse. The reports came in every hour. They sent a final transmission 3 days ago. There were peaceful artists and philosophers, not warriors. They had no weapons that mattered. Their greatest strength was their culture, their music, their ability to dream beautiful things. None of that mattered against plasma cannons that could melt a city in seconds. Hayes received the refugee request on a Tuesday morning. The fleet was coming. 2 million souls in ships barely designed for deep space travel. They had been running for weeks, watching their burn behind them. Now they were asking Earth for sanctuary. Captain Morgan walked into the observation deck and stood beside Hayes. She was one of his senior commanders, and she did not look happy. "Sir, you cannot be serious about this," Morgan said. Her voice was hard and direct. 2 million mouths to feed. We barely have resources for our own population. Hayes did not turn away from the window. He kept watching the stars. "Where else can they go?" he asked. "That is not our problem," Morgan replied. "We have colonies on 442b on Mars, on the 3 moons of Jupiter. We are stretched thin already. A commander's first duty is to his own people." Hayes finally turned to face her. "I know what a commander's duty is. I also know what it means to watch people die because nobody will help them." The conversation continued for hours. Other officers joined. They brought numbers and projections. They showed how refugee populations would strain water supplies, food production, medical facilities. They were not wrong. Every word they said was true. But Hayes had made his decision before the meeting even started. "Send the order," Hayes said. "Open the borders, we take them in." Morgan's jaw tightened. "You understand what this means. If they know that we are harboring refugees from their conquest, they will come for us. We will become a target." "We are already a target," Hayes replied. "We are humans. We exist in a galaxy that does not want us here. Being a target is not new, but we do not run from people who need help. That is the difference between them and us." The fleet arrived 5 days later. The first ships came through the jump gate like ghosts, their hulls scorched and damaged from weeks of running. Hayes watched from the observation deck as the convoy moved toward Earth's orbital stations. He counted the ships. Thousands of them, most of them small, built for colony transport, not for protection. They were tall, with skin that shifted between blue and purple depending on the light. Their culture valued art and community. They had artists aboard those ships, musicians, teachers, children. Millions of them had lost everything and were now refugees looking for a place to sleep. Maya Cooper worked in the Refugee Relocation Center. She was young, maybe 30 years old, and she had volunteered to help coordinate the intake process. She walked through the docking bays and watched as families disembarked from transport shuttles. Many of them carried nothing. They had left there in the clothes they wore. "How many?" asked Robert Collins, the station commander, as he reviewed the numbers. 2.3 million, Maya said. "The last shuttles are arriving now." Collins rubbed his temples. "This is insane. We do not have the infrastructure for this." "They are people," Maya said. "They have nowhere else to go." "That does not change our situation," Collins replied. But something changed anyway. They began to work. They took jobs in the colonies. They helped expand the habitats. Engineers proved skilled at solving problems. Artists began teaching human children. Within weeks, the refugee population was not a burden but a contribution. They were working for survival, and they were good at it. On Earth, things were different. Political leaders argued about the decision. Some colonists welcomed the refugees. Others demanded they be sent away. Public opinion split down the middle. Hayes received death threats. He also received letters from people thanking him for saving lives. But the most important message came through official channels. It was encrypted and marked with the highest security classification. The collective had noticed the fleet disappearing. Their scouts had tracked the refugee convoy heading toward human space. The collective's leaders understood what had happened. Commander of the collective sent a single transmission to Earth. It was a warning and a promise. "You have harbored our conquered subjects. You have become our enemy. We will erase your species from this sector." Hayes read the message 3 times. He did not doubt that the meant every word. He called an emergency council meeting. The highest military leaders of Earth gathered in the war room. Hayes told them the truth. They were coming. The collective would send their forces to destroy Earth and reclaim the refugees. The timeline was unclear, but the threat was certain. "How long do we have?" asked Admiral Jackson, the head of Earth Space Defense. "Days, maybe weeks," Hayes said. "They are mobilizing their invasion force." The room fell silent. Every officer understood what this meant. Earth was about to fight its first real war against an alien civilization that had already conquered 17 worlds. Hayes stood up and looked each officer in the eye. "We knew this was a possibility when we made the decision," he said. "We took them in anyway. That tells you something about who we are. Now we have to decide who we want to be when the fighting starts." He paused and let the weight of the moment settle in the room. "We do not run, we do not hide, we stand, and we make sure that anyone who comes for our people pays that the attack came at dawn on a Tuesday morning." Earth's early warning system detected the fleet approaching at high speed. 43 warships emerged from hyperspace, moving in formation like a hammer ready to strike. The refugee convoy had not yet fully reached Earth's orbital defense perimeter. Captain Ward stood on the bridge of the USS Intrepid, watching the enemy approach on his tactical display. The ships were large, armored, designed for overwhelming firepower. The Intrepid was fast, built for speed and maneuverability, but it carried a fraction of the weapons they had. "All hands to battle stations," Ward commanded. His voice was calm, but every person on the bridge heard the certainty underneath it. The collective expected the humans to flee. Their military analysts had reviewed human capabilities and found them wanting. Humans had limited weapons. Their ships were small and light. Their empire was young. They had conquered 17 civilizations with far more advanced technology. This should be simple. Ward received orders from Commander Hayes moments later. The Intrepid and 2 other human destroyers would position themselves between the fleet and the refugee convoy. They would hold the line long enough for the civilian ships to jump to hyperspace and reach Earth's surface. That was the mission. That was also a death sentence. The human destroyers moved into position. They were not hiding and not running. They were simply standing in the way. They opened fire first. Plasma cannons roared across the void of space, leaving trails of burning light. The human destroyers returned fire with laser weapons and missile barrages. The weapons struck the ships, but the damage was minimal. Armor was designed to withstand exactly this kind of assault. Their ships could take punishment that would destroy human vessels. But humans were fast. The Intrepid rolled hard to starboard, dodging a salvo of fire. Ward pushed the ship to speeds they did not expect. They were moving in patterns that made no tactical sense to alien military strategists, but the patterns worked. They bought time. "How many of the refugee ships have jumped?" Ward asked. 30% away, sir," reported his tactical officer. "The remaining transports need 12 more minutes." 12 minutes. The Intrepid could not last 12 minutes against this enemy. Ward knew the numbers as well as anyone, but humans did not always obey the numbers. The USS Pacific took a direct hit to its port engine. The destroyer lurched, losing speed, becoming vulnerable. It would be destroyed in seconds if it continued trying to hold the line. Ward made the decision that would become legend. He altered the Intrepid's course and moved directly between the Pacific and the bombardment. The Pacific's captain understood what was happening. Ward was sacrificing his ship to buy more time. The captain transmitted a simple message: "Thank you." Then he pushed the Pacific away, moving the damaged destroyer toward the refugee convoy. Ward took the full brunt of the next attack. The Intrepid's shields failed. The ship's hull began to crack. Alarms screamed. Fire spread through the corridors. Ward stayed at his command console, watching the refugee ships. Most of them had made the jump now. Most of them were safe. "Captain, we need to evacuate," said his first officer. Ward did not look away from the display. "In 30 seconds," he said. 20 more seconds passed. The last transport jumped to hyperspace. The civilian ships were gone. Earth was safe. Ward turned to his officer. "Evacuation pods away," he commanded. "All remaining crew now." The evacuation order was issued, but there was not enough time. The fire was too intense. Only half the crew made it to the pods. The rest stayed on the bridge or tried to reach evacuation routes that no longer existed. Ward stayed at his post. He guided the evacuation pods toward the outer edges of the battle, away from the heaviest fire. The USS Intrepid's final moments came quickly. The ship's main reactor began to fail. The oxygen systems shut down. The lights went dark. But in those final seconds, Captain Ward transmitted one last message to Earth. The convoy is clear. They made it. Tell them they are safe. Tell them the price was worth it. The Intrepid exploded in a bloom of light and fire. The ship broke apart, scattering debris across the void. The fleet ceased fire, having lost interest in an enemy that no longer existed. But something had changed. They were confused. This made no sense by any military standard. Humans had taken a position they could not hold. They had fought an enemy they could not defeat. They had sacrificed themselves to protect others. They had conquered through power and dominance. They had never faced an enemy willing to die for something other than survival. The remaining human destroyers regrouped. Admiral Jackson took command and ordered them to make a tactical retreat. The battle had been lost. The convoy had been protected. It was time to fall back and prepare for the next assault. As the human ships moved away, they did not pursue. They were still analyzing what had just happened. Their military computers tried to find the tactical logic in Ward's decision. There was none. Humans had simply chosen to die to protect others. They could not understand this. It was not in their programming, not in their strategy, not in their nature. Back on Earth, Commander Hayes received the report of the Intrepid's destruction. He read Ward's final message twice. Then he made a decision that would echo across human space. Every ship in our fleet will carry Captain Ward's name. Every child born on a world will hear his story. We will not forget what he sacrificed so that others might live. The collective received reports that humanity had lost this battle. The refugee convoy had escaped to Earth. One human destroyer had been destroyed. By all logical measures, this should have frightened the humans into submission. Instead, the High Command received new intelligence reports. Human military production was increasing. Ships were being built faster, weapons were being developed, and humans were organizing. The refugees were contributing military expertise. Humans and aliens were working together. The collective understood that its simple invasion strategy had failed. The conquest of Earth would not be easy. It would require a full military assault. The collective began to mobilize. They would send not a strike force, but an invasion fleet. They would come with overwhelming numbers and firepower. They would crush any resistance and ensure that humans never stood in the way of the again. But on Earth, in the refugee centers and on the military bases, something else was happening. Stories were being told about Captain Ward, about how one person's sacrifice could change everything, about how standing your ground meant something, about how the cost of running was sometimes worse than the cost of fighting. The military strategists arrived at the defense headquarters 3 days after Captain Ward's death. Their leader was a tall being named, with skin the color of deep water, had been a commander in the military before they destroyed his. Now he was homeless, like millions of his people. Did not come to ask for protection. He came to offer expertise. I know told Commander Hayes in a private meeting. I have fought their military forces. I know their weaknesses. Hayes listened carefully as laid out the tactical patterns. The collective relied on overwhelming firepower and heavy armor. Their ships were built to take damage and deliver massive damage in return. But this meant their ships were slow. This meant they were built to fight in specific patterns. This meant they were predictable. If you can attack them in ways they do not expect, said, you can damage them. Their armor is strong, but their design is rigid. Change the rules of combat and their strength becomes a weakness. Hayes brought in Admiral Jackson and Morgan. The three of them spent hours reviewing analysis. By the end of the meeting, they had a plan. It was not a plan that would guarantee victory, but it was a plan that might allow humans to survive. They came next. They were an aquatic species that had fled from 2 systems over, running ahead of the advance. They brought encryption technology that they had not cracked. They were brilliant mathematicians and code breakers. If humans were going to coordinate a military response, they needed secure communications. They could provide that. Then came the crystalline beings who existed in forms humans barely understood. They were energy-based who had developed combat capabilities that seemed almost like magic. A warrior could move faster than human eyes could follow. They could burn through metal and shield generators. They were rare and valuable, and they volunteered their combat specialists to help humanity. Within 3 weeks, Earth's orbital shipyards had begun construction of new warships. The designs combined human engineering with tactical knowledge, encrypted systems, and energy weapons. The ships looked different from anything in the known galaxy. They were strange, built for unpredictable maneuvers and rapid weapon deployment. They were not the most armored ships. They were not the most powerful ships, but they were the fastest and most adaptable. Admiral Morgan oversaw the construction. She worked 18-hour days, reviewing designs, testing new weapons, coordinating with alien engineers who had never worked with humans before. It was impossible work. It should have failed. But Morgan had fought the once already, and she had survived. She understood what it took to beat an enemy that seemed unbeatable. The human fleet grew. 50 ships became 100. 100 became 500. By the second month, Earth was building the largest military force the sector had ever assembled. Ships came from human colony worlds. Humans who had been farmers, scientists, artists, and workers became soldiers. They learned to fight and to work alongside aliens who had been enemies in previous conflicts but were now allies in survival. Maya Cooper worked in the Civilian Coordination Center. She watched as the refugees transformed the colonial infrastructure. Engineers rebuilt power systems to be more efficient. Artists designed public spaces that helped people feel less like refugees and more like community members. They were not waiting for humans to save them. They were saving themselves by making themselves essential. But not everyone supported the effort. On Earth and in the colonies, there was dissent. Some humans argued that the money being spent on ships should go to building more colonies. Some believed that fighting was impossible and that humanity should negotiate instead of prepare for war. Some simply feared the unknown. Commander Hayes held a public broadcast. He stood in front of a camera in the Earth Broadcasting Center and spoke to the entire human population. His words were simple and direct. "Some of you think we are making a mistake," Hayes said. "Some of you believe we should send thee away and hope the leaves us alone. I will tell you the truth. The collective does not make deals. They do not negotiate. They conquer and move on. If we send thee away, they will come anyway. They will come because we showed weakness. They will come because they can. The only thing that stops a predator is showing that you have teeth. The only thing that stops an invasion is standing up and fighting back. We are building a fleet not because we want war. We are building a fleet because peace only comes to those strong enough to defend it. I know the cost. I know it will be expensive and difficult. I know some of you will lose family members, but I also know what the cost of running is. I have seen it. They have seen it. 17 civilizations have paid that price with their existence. We will not be the 18th. They sent a strike force of 50 warships to test humanity's defenses. It was meant to be a simple operation. The collective would destroy the human fleet in a quick assault and move on to conquering Earth itself. The strike force was commanded by General, one of the most experienced military leaders, had conquered 12 worlds. 50 warships under his command had never lost a battle. Admiral Morgan gathered the human commanders in the war room. The tactical display showed the approaching fleet, 50 against 1,000. The numbers looked good on the surface, but ships carried more firepower than 5 human ships combined. The actual firepower calculation was much closer. "They are testing us," said the strategist. "This is not their full invasion force. This is a probe to see if we will hold or break." Morgan nodded. "Then we show them that we hold, and we show them it costs more than they can afford." The plan was simple in theory but complex in execution. The human fleet would not meet thee in open space. Instead, they would draw thee into the asteroid fields near Helios Prime. The asteroids would neutralize the advantage in firepower. In close quarters among rocks and debris, agility mattered more than armor. The human fleet moved to position. The ships spread out in a defensive formation designed to protect Earth while drawing toward the asteroid field. It was bait, and everyone knew it. But sometimes the best strategy is the one the enemy expects the least. The fleet detected the human formation and immediately moved to attack. They were confident, arrogant even. 50 warships should be enough to crush 1,000 smaller human vessels. General did not understand that humans were already winning the battle before the first shots were fired. The engagement began at dawn. Human ships opened fire with everything they had. Laser weapons struck armor. Missile barrages lit up the darkness. The returned fire with overwhelming force. Several human ships took critical damage immediately. A cruiser named the USS Dakota lost its main reactor and began to spiral out of control. But the human fleet did not scatter. They moved as a unified force, drawing the deeper into the asteroid field. The larger ships began to slow as they navigated the debris. Their powerful weapons became less effective when targets were shielded by asteroids. The human ships, smaller and more maneuverable, darted between the rocks and struck from unexpected angles. Captain James Turner commanded the USS Dakota, the damaged cruiser. His ship was dying. The reactor was failing. The engines were offline, but he was still in the fight. Turner ordered his crew to abandon ship while he activated the ship's weapons in a final attack sequence. "Load all remaining power into the forward cannons," Turner commanded. "Captain, you will not survive that," his weapons officer said. "I know," Turner replied. "Do it anyway." The USS Dakota's weapons discharged in one massive burst of energy. The blast struck a frigate directly, punching through its armor and tearing into its core systems. The ship exploded. Turner died on the command deck, but his sacrifice took an enemy ship with him. General began to understand that something was wrong. His forces were taking damage. Human pilots were dying to ensure that they took ships with them. Humans were choosing death in ways that confused tactical algorithms. The strategy was built on the assumption that beings would fight to survive. But these humans were fighting to win, and if they had to die to achieve that, they would. The battle raged for 8 hours. The asteroid field became a graveyard. Ship debris floated among the rocks. Explosions lit up the darkness. They used their firepower advantage to destroy human ships, but every ship they destroyed cost them more than they expected. A human destroyer named the USS Boston was hit directly by plasma fire. The ship began to break apart, but the captain, Captain Price, ordered her crew to fight on. They continued to fire their weapons even as the hull cracked around them. They struck a battleship, damaging it severely. The Boston died, but it took a much more valuable enemy with it. They coordinated the entire fleet through encrypted communications that they could not break. Every move was coordinated. Every attack was planned. The combat pilots flew fighter ships at speeds the weapons could barely track. They burned through enemy defenses like flames through paper. By hour 8, the strike force was broken. 20 of the 50 warships had been destroyed. Another 15 were too damaged to continue fighting. The remaining 15 were fleeing at maximum speed, attempting to escape back to space. General's fleet, which had never lost a battle, was being defeated by an enemy that should have been easily crushed. Admiral Morgan made a decision that changed everything. She ordered the human fleet to let the damaged ships escape. There was no tactical advantage in pursuing them. Instead, she wanted them to return to the collective with news of their defeat. As the surviving ships limped back toward their territory, the human fleet regrouped. The cost was staggering. 377 human ships had been destroyed. 23,000 human military personnel were dead. Hundreds of alien soldiers had fallen. The human victory was not clean. It was bloody and expensive. But it was a victory. For the first time, had been defeated. General had brought 50 warships to destroy the human fleet. He was returning with barely half that number, his tail between his legs. News of the victory spread across human space like wildfire. In the refugee camps, the heard that they could be hurt. On the colony worlds, humans enlisted in the military by the thousands. They offered to contribute more combat specialists. The work to improve their code-breaking the invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace in a formation that covered 3,000 kilometers of space. 1,000 warships, arranged in a military pattern designed for overwhelming assault. The collective had assembled every major vessel it could muster. This was the full power of the military machine. This was meant to be the end of humanity. Commander David Hayes stood on the bridge of the flagship, watching the fleet approach on his tactical display. The ships appeared as red dots on a black field, 1,000 dots, and behind them, Earth. Behind them, and millions of humans who had nowhere left to run. Admiral Morgan stood beside him. She had survived 2 battles against She had learned their tactics, their strengths, their weaknesses. 2,700 ships ready for engagement, Morgan reported. All crews at battle stations. Alien coordination teams are linked and ready. Hayes nodded slowly. 2,700 human and alien ships against 1,000 warships. The numbers looked good until you realized that the ships were 3 times more powerful. It was a closer match than the numbers suggested. It was still not enough, mathematically speaking. But mathematics did not account for what was about to happen. "Signal all ships," Hayes commanded. "We hold the line, nothing gets past us. No matter what happens, nothing gets past." The signal went out through secure channels to every ship in the human armada. The message was simple: stand or die, protect Earth or fall. There was no retreat. There was no backup plan. This was the line in the sand. The only place left to run was humanity's ironclad armada. The fleet approached at high speed. They were moving in formation, weapons hot, ready to deliver the assault that would destroy the human fleet in a matter of hours. But they were in for a shock. The human fleet had learned from every battle. They had studied tactics until they understood them better than themselves. The battle began with an attack. Fast-moving crystalline beings shot forward in fighter craft, moving at speeds that made them nearly invisible to targeting systems. They struck the lead formation, burning through shields and armor with energy weapons that they had no defense against. The fleet scattered, breaking their formation. This was mistake number one. Once the formation broke, they lost the tactical advantage of unified firepower. Then the strategists activated the secondary attack. Human and alien ships swooped in from vectors they had not anticipated, had studied tactics for weeks, and he knew exactly where the holes in their defense were. The human armada struck at those weak points with precision. A battleship took damage to its port side. The wound was minor, but it forced the ship to adjust its course. Two more vessels collided trying to avoid it. The collision damaged both ships severely. The human fleet's first coordinated assault had already destroyed or crippled 15 ships. General, commanding the invasion fleet, realized that this battle was not going to proceed as planned. The humans were fighting with intelligence and coordination. They had learned from previous engagements. They were not simply throwing ships at his fleet and hopping for the best. They were fighting like tacticians. "Adjust formation to combat pattern Delta," commanded. "All ships focus fire on the largest human concentrations." The fleet reorganized. They began using their overwhelming firepower more effectively. The next salvo of weapons destroyed 18 human ships in seconds. The human fleet was taking casualties far faster than they could replace them. But the humans did not stop fighting. Captain Michael Torres, commanding the USS Valiant, took a hit to his ship's shield generators. The weapons went offline, but Torres did not retreat. Instead, he used the ship as a moving barrier. He positioned the Valiant between a human-civilian transport and an incoming weapons barrage. The Valiant was destroyed. Torres and his crew died. But the civilian transport was saved. That was the exchange. That was the mathematics of human sacrifice. For 3 days and nights, the battle raged. Ships burned and exploded. The void of space became a graveyard of metal and bodies. The lost ships, but they were losing them slowly. The human fleet was being decimated. Admiral Morgan watched the numbers change on her tactical display. Ships going offline, crews dying, the casualty count climbing higher every minute. But something was happening that they did not expect. As the human ships died, as the costs climbed higher, the humans fought harder. They pushed themselves to the edge of their abilities. They coordinated increasingly complex attacks. They broke communication codes that were supposed to be unbreakable. And the humans, the simple humans from a young species in a young colony world, fought with a ferocity that confused every military analyst. By the end of day 2, they had destroyed 800 human ships. 800. The human fleet should have been broken, should have been fleeing, should have been ready to surrender. Instead, the remaining 1,700 human ships were fighting harder than ever. General began to see the pattern. Every human ship that died made the remaining humans fight more intensely. Every loss strengthened their resolve rather than weakening it. They fought to win. Humans fought to protect something, and that made all the difference. On the bridge of the flagship, Hayes stood with Admiral Morgan. They had lost so much, so many good people, so many ships, but Earth still stood behind them. The refugee families that had come to humanity looking for safety were still safe. "How long can we hold?" Hayes asked. Morgan looked at the tactical display. The human fleet was smaller now, but it was still fighting. It was still standing. "As long as we have ships," she said. On day 3, something broke. The fleet, which had been designed for overwhelming assault, began to show signs of internal collapse. Ships that had been fighting each other for resources now had to coordinate in retreat. The formation, which had been tight and disciplined, began to fragment. The human fleet, seeing the opportunity, pushed harder. Every remaining ship moved forward. Pilots flew directly into formations, burning themselves out. Designed weapons struck at critical systems. Cryptography disrupted command and control. and human soldiers, pilots, and commanders fought with the knowledge that they were protecting something that mattered. By the end of Day 3, the invasion fleet was broken. The remaining ships, fewer than 200, were fleeing at maximum speed back towards space. The human armada had won. The cost was terrible: 800 ships destroyed, 140,000 dead, families lost, colonies devastated. But the invasion had been stopped. They had learned that they could not simply conquer everything. They had learned that there were beings willing to die to protect others. Admiral Morgan brought up the casualty reports. She read them without emotion, committing each number to memory. Commander Hayes received a transmission from the commander. The message was simple: "We are safe because of you, because of your people, thank you." Hayes responded with words that would be remembered in human history. "We stood because standing is what we do. We protected you because protection of the innocent is what makes us human. We won because we understood that there is no place left to run when you make your stand together." The collective, receiving news of the invasion forces' defeat, fell silent. They had lost more than ships. They had lost the belief that they could conquer anything. They had faced humans and been defeated. The galaxy suddenly looked different to them. It was no longer a place they could dominate. It was a place where others could fight back. The Galactic Council reformed with humanity at its center, not through conquest but through sacrifice. The message spread across known space: there is a species called humans. They will stand against anything to protect those they have chosen to care for. They will die for each other. And that, more than any weapon, makes them the most powerful force in the galaxy. In the refugee camps and on the colony worlds, people heard the news. And every other species that had fled before the collective heard that they were safe. They heard that humans had stood, that humans had fought, that humans had won. And the message was clear: there was finally a place that would not run. There was finally a home. But in the collective, the news had a different effect. The High Command was shocked. An advanced military civilization had been defeated by an armada of refugees and colonists. This changed everything. The collective could no longer assume that simple firepower would guarantee victory. They could not assume that humans would break under pressure. The decision was made at the highest levels of leadership. The collective would send not a strike force but a full invasion fleet, 1,000 warships, 500,000 troops, everything they could gather in the sector. They would come to Earth and end this threat permanently. They would show humanity what true power meant. But they did not understand what was about to happen. They did not know that humans, when forced to fight for their survival and for those they protected, became something the galaxy had never faced. They were about to learn what desperation and determination could accomplish. The human fleet had won its first real battle. Now it was time for the final war. We stand, we fight, and we make sure that everyone knows that humans will die before we abandon those who came to us looking for protection. That is who we are. That is what makes us different from we build allies, we protect the weak, we stand together. The broadcast ended. In the weeks that followed, military recruitment increased. Young humans lined up to join the fleet. Humans from other colony worlds volunteered their ships and their crews. The armada grew larger every day. By the third month, the human fleet numbered over 1,000 ships. They came from Earth, from Mars, from the orbital stations, from colony worlds spread across human space. They were different sizes and designs. Some were old military vessels. Some were brand new. Some had been converted from cargo ships and civilian transports. Together, they formed something that had never existed before: a human and alien armada built on the principle of mutual survival. The collective received intelligence reports about the fleet building. Their military analysts reviewed the data and were unconcerned. Humans could build ships. Humans could arm them. But they had conquered 17 civilizations with far more advanced technology. One armada of refugees and colonists would not change that. But they were about to discover something critical. Numbers and firepower were not the only things that mattered in war. Desperation mattered. Sacrifice mattered. Standing together mattered. And they were about to face an enemy willing to pay any price to survive. The armada was ready. Now it was time for the real war to begin. They did not understand this. They were about to learn. In blood and fire, that is what it means to have a home. That is what it means to be human. The officers exchanged looks. Some of them still disagreed with bringing the into human space. But they understood their duty. Earth would stand. The question was whether it would survive. Outside the window, Earth spun slowly in the darkness. Millions have lived in the colonies now. Millions of humans worked to prepare for war. And beyond the stars, the collective prepared its invasion force, certain that one more conquest would be easy. They were wrong, but they did not know that yet.